Want to make a difference in geographic fields? Volunteer with the NorthStar GIS and help build a racially just geography for a racially just world. Sign up now at northstargis.org/volunteer.
Be Black. Be bold. Be innovative. Show the world equitable geo.
We're coming together as a collective to celebrate people of African descent, the diaspora, and talking about geospatial equity and justice.
You're listening to the NorthStar GAZE, a podcast with intimate stories from geoluminaries.
Well, thank you so much. I want to try to respectfully close so folks can get on with the rest of their lives. I really appreciate everyone for taken the time to be here. I'm going to try to do some kind of a rapid overture of the experience as much as I can. So we've been talking all year really about designing an equitable and feminist future through these intersecting lenses of art, Afrofuturism, and geography, thinking of art as the ways in which we can bring our unique voices to bear, geography as a powerful lens to allow us to break down the many layers of what we experience and what communities experience and bring them together in an interesting way. And Afrofuturism as a bold vision of where we should be moving towards. Our organization got its roots, its foundation, took its inspiration from figures like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman. This is why NorthStar is the name that we chose. We root ourselves at a foundation of Ubuntu and the 7 principles of Kwanzaa and try to really bring life into them through the work that we do. Because we recognize that very often it's people who don't look like us who are mapping our future. And in and across the spaces where we all work, topics of race and racism are treated as if they are in that realm beyond which here there be dragons, when we know that we need to bring attention to these conversations in the same way that maps were used to carve up our communities and decide where to put harms and where to put benefits. Again, this moment in time that forged us into an identity that many of us collectively think of as Black, this middle passage is in and of itself an example of colonial powers mapping the planet to use those maps for the purpose of doing harm to some to their own benefit. I always like to take some historic figure, and for a moment I was inspired to do some of my slides about Lincoln, but I'm just going to stick to the program and instead talk about Benjamin Franklin real quick and his thoughts on white people, aliens, and immigration. What did Ben think in 1751? What was he thinking about? Let's see. He wrote this paper about immigration because he was concerned about what the colonies that they were starting to call America was starting to look like. And he put on paper that the number of purely white people in the world is proportionally very small. And he could wish that their numbers were increased. And while we are, as I might call it, scouring our planet by clearing America of woods, and so making this side of the globe reflect a brighter light in the eyes of the inhabitants of Mars and Venus, why should we, in the sight of superior beings, darken its people? This guy thought that, really cool, he believed there might be aliens on Mars and Venus. That's cool. They made us progressive at that time. But he thought that they would be looking at Earth and thinking, why isn't that continent white enough? This was a thing that was so important to him that they thought it might be important to these superior beings. This is classic white supremacy, the belief that white people constitute a superior race and should therefore dominate society, typically to the exclusion or detriment of other racial and ethnic groups. He went on to say, why increase the sons of Africa by planting them in America, where we have so fair an opportunity by excluding all Blacks and tawnies of increasing the lovely white and red? There's a lot going on here. Who are these tawnies? The reds are lovely, right? Race is a social construct. What does that mean? At the intersection of time and place and culture, the classifications of humanity and who is within that classification and who is beneath it change all the time. I don't know if I'll go into who these tawnies are, but I'll tell you. Well, they were the people who were not Saxon, the people who were not British. So that's only some portion of Germans who could classify at this time as being white. And everybody else in Europe was thought of with some other color in some spectrum of racial color. And at this time, the Native Americans and the folks who we were thinking of as Native Americans were being embraced as noble. Their legal system are in many ways, the legal systems are in many ways at the roots of American legal systems. There were many colonists who were immigrating into Native communities because they valued and appreciated their lifestyle. And at some point around this period, things start to pivot because they're starting to lose some of their colonial forces to immigration into Native populations. Let's see what else we have here. I don't even necessarily remember what I'm going to say next, but perhaps, this is the part, but perhaps I am partial to the complexion of my country. For such kind of partiality is natural to mankind. He believed that it's just normal to prefer people of your complexion. He assumed, therefore, one would imagine, that everybody was some kind of a supremacist as it related to their own complexion. And so what does that mean he thought of the aliens? He must have thought even the aliens were white if they were superior beings. Now, quick question, because we like to keep it interactive. How many people knew any of this?
Go on. No, the words.
Yeah.
There's a lot of books that are interesting to read.
Yep.
Washington.
I would suggest everyone look at the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Sometimes we say the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and it is just a label for a critical conversation about race. Lincoln would have lost his run for the office of presidency if he didn't make it clear, not only did he have no thought in his mind that Black people could ever be equal to whites, he also thought that white people should always be superior. He had no intention that Black people should ever get the right to vote. But somehow he thought that the inalienable rights that the Constitution provided should not be withheld from the Black man in the same way they shouldn't be withheld from the white man. Now, all that narrative was man-oriented. He wasn't talking about women, except in so much as to say that he neither wanted a Black woman for a slave or his wife and had never wanted them as such and could just leave them alone. These are things that Lincoln said, and we think about him through the lens that people want us to think about him. So I spend some time from time to time visiting Europe to learn about the histories and cultures of Black people. Because in many ways, Blackness was triggered, if not defined, by Europeans' decision that this is an easy way to classify some people as other and beneath us that we can get our whole communities rallied around. So there's organizations like the LGCA network that in some ways I see as a potential sister organization to NorthStar. And their work is largely around helping organizations like ours do their work across the Black diaspora in a more deeply connected way. There's NINSE, the National Institute for the Study of Dutch Slavery and its Legacy. And they told me that some of their founders had participated in a ceremony commemorating the 160th anniversary of the Dutch abolition of slavery in 2023. And at that ceremony, the Dutch king apologized for the Dutch involvement in slavery and its lingering impacts. Now, I don't know if you all know this, but the Dutch were 5 small provinces that had a plan. They thought if they came together, they could create a company that would monopolize the slave trade. Yep. And they charted the oceans to kidnap, store, and ship over 500,000 people as property. And I wondered if the Dutch king had really thought about not just the people who they snatched from their homes, but the people who were then scattered across the globe as he was making that apology. It's over 500,000 people. I talked yesterday briefly about this moment in time when the United States and European countries got together. This is a sketch of the conversation in the room, but what people knew was there was a large map of Africa up on the wall. And a lot of white gentlemen were sitting around making decisions about who could get which places, because each place had a value, either in the minerals, the materials, the wood, or in the people as property, not just to harness their physical labor, but their skills as well. There are maps of Africa that are carved up in relation to the skill sets and knowledge in spaces that were created by European colonial forces. And complementary to those maps would be signs declaring the sale of people as property, not simply based on their identity, their size, their gender, but on their skill set. Not just as laborers, but as architects, engineers, as we would call them botanists today. There's so many ways in which this might be more of a story about mapping the realities of something, but again, maps being used to carve up communities to associate value with or take value away from communities. This to me was the state of the art at the time of what we call redlining, where sometimes we look at redlining as the trigger, the initiator, or cause, but really redlining was the government saying, you know what, all this segregation stuff, it seems to be working. What can we do to amplify, to enhance, to support these practices? And they documented that work. And so now when disasters occur, we often find ourselves facing the full brunt of issues while others are being better supported. And even when we try to get a seat at the table, we experience bias, exclusion, and underrepresentation that makes it really difficult for us to survive, thrive, and really make the case for our communities. So coming together in community like this, in spaces like this, help. And we hope that we have shared some tools and strategies for building spaces for change, that together we can not just learn about this great technology, but be prepared to confront the exclusion, underrepresentation, and bias that puts us in fight, flight, freeze, and fawn mode. We turned to our neighbors and we said, I'm with you. We turned to our neighbors and we shared an apology. We recognize the trauma of our experiences. We also recognize the power and strength that we have together and how we can create lasting change. We talked about the kind of impact that we like to have through our programming, and we invited you all to share your thoughts, your ideas. And I'm going to look at every single paper that we have here, try to transcribe them. And we had powerful conversations and messages from great leaders across a variety of industries. We had time to be in community with each other, to share our stories. And I'll say I learned this approach from someone who said that who you are, like a brand, should be a promise. And when you try to think about what your promise and your commitment is, from a professional perspective, your name matters for sure, but where you have impact, where you are from, how you quantify that impact and what you're passionate about really matters. So, I would love for you all to think about even this as a tool, not just for having great connection and community, but for also thinking about how you define who you are in the way you move through the world. We want to thank our sponsors as we thank our speakers, and we thank our attendees for joining us over these past couple of days. It has really been a great experience for us, and we hope that it's been a great experience for you.
If you enjoyed this episode and want to learn more about NorthStar of GIS, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at GIS NorthStar.
We want to thank our sponsors of the 2024 Homecoming event, our institutional partner Regrid, and our sponsors New Light Technology, Afrotech, and Black at Work. We'd like to thank our keynotes, Tara Roberts, Linda Harris, Dr. Paulette Hines-Brown, and Vernice Miller-Travis. We'd like to thank Howard University and the staff at the Interdisciplinary Building and Photography by Imagery by Chioma. We also want to thank our guests for trusting us with their stories. Tara, Linda, Paulette, Christian, Abraham, Jason, Vernice, Stella, B.E., Karen, Nikki, George, Frank, Labdi, Toussaint, Victoria, and the HBCU Environmental Justice Technical Team. And finally, thank you to the NorthStar team and our wonderful volunteers.
We are your hosts of the season 2 of the NorthStar GAZE podcast, which is based on the 2024 Homecoming Conference event.
Thanks for listening to the NorthStar GAZE, intimate stories from geoluminaries. If you're inspired to advance racial justice in geofields, please share this podcast with other listeners in your community. The intro and outro are produced by Organized Sound Productions with original music created by Kid Bodega. The NorthStar GAZE is produced in large part by donations and sponsorship. To learn more about NorthStar GIS, check us out at northstarofgis.org and on Facebook or Instagram at GIS NorthStar. If you'd like to support this podcast and NorthStar of GIS, consider donating at northstarofgis.org/donate. Or to sponsor this podcast, email podcast@northstarofgis.org. You've been listening to the NorthStar GAZE.